Welcome back to Holiness of the Lord, and this time we'll be covering the book of Joshua. In Joshua chapter 2, verse 18, it says that the window was marked with scarlet thread, which to me is very similar to the children of Israel marking their doors with blood while in Egypt, and the angel of death to pass over them. So the children of Israel taking over Jericho, is very reminiscent of the last time God made a covenant and alluded to the atonement of Jesus Christ to be the saving factor within people. In Joshua chapter 3, verse 5, Joshua commands the people to follow the ark and sanctify themselves, so that they will be ready and worthy for the wonders the Lord will do among them. This sets up the river crossing story, where just like the Red Sea, and just like a covenant, the river crossing happened on the first day of the Passover, so the Lord wasn't being subtle in messaging here, and allowed a new generation to see a miraculous intervention during a holy day. This goes directly back to Moses and just reaffirms the Lord's commitment and the two-way promise that the Lord has made with the children of Israel, that if they will follow him, he will do the miraculous for them, and he will open up a path for them to move forward in all things. In Joshua 4, verses 5 through 7, they took stones from that riverbed that had parted, one for each tribe, so they could have a physical, tangible witness and reminder of the covenants and power of the Lord. While the importance was the spiritual nature of the miracle, the testimony that each of them was able to glean from that experience, the Lord offers physical reminders and testaments that we can take with us to help us remember and stay committed to what we have been shown. Much like we bear physical reminders when coming away from the temple of things that we have been shown and covenants we have made. In Joshua 5, verse 12, I've previously compared entering the promised land to entering the presence of the Lord, but scripture stories can have multiple allusions. Here I find it interesting that after they passed over the river Jordan, that manna stopped. The children of Israel, even though they had rebelled in the wilderness, had been taken care of by God, similar to how the Lord took care of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Now they would no longer be provided for within the promised land. They'd have to provide bread for themselves by the sweat of their brow, hopefully now knowing and relying on the spiritual nourishment and habits they had formed from their time repenting in the wilderness. In Joshua chapter 8, verses 30 through 32, I think it's cool that Joshua wrote the law of Moses on stones that made up the altar, so that the law and the commandments are the things holding up the center of their worship, the sacrifice itself, aka an allusion to Jesus Christ and his atonement. In Joshua 18, verse 1, as the children of Israel are dividing up the promised land, they set up the tabernacle at Shiloh, which, because I know the New Testament, this gets referenced a lot in name later, and I just want to note it is significant because the tabernacle and the ordinances that take place there. In Joshua 21, verses 43 through 44, after the children of Israel do all that God has commanded in inhabiting the promised land, it says that the Lord gave them rest. And it is that rest that we can all look forward to when this life is through, when we have done all that God has commanded us to do. And that rest lies at the end of our journey through the covenants, through the covenant path, and in the presence of God. Again, an allusion to the tabernacle and the temple. In Joshua 22, verse 5, it says that Joshua admonishes his people to take diligence and heed to do the commandment and the law, to love the Lord your God and walk in his ways. It seems like a very plain call to remember the ordinances and covenants that were made within the context of the tabernacle, as a path into the tabernacle is the path and the way back to God's presence. In verses 26 through 27, it seems as if there have been altars built without the knowledge and authority from the prophet or anyone else spiritually in charge. But the altars are allowed to stay up, that it may be a witness that we might do the service of the Lord before him. And they indicate that they will go and do the proper sacrifices at the proper altars. I appreciate that this shows both the need for ordinances to be performed through the proper channels and authority, but also that God allows his children the grace for them to make things as a witness to God of their own good faith and willingness to follow him. There's a grace that is given there that we as his children can do our best to show God in our own way how we are trying to follow him, but that does not reclude us from still needing to follow the proper channels and follow the ordinances and things as they have been set up. In chapter 23, verses 11 through 12, Joshua commands the people to love the Lord, lest the people cleave unto those unbelieving nations around them and enter into marriages with them. This to me shows a clear place of the need for the covenant of marriage between those who fear and worship God in order for a given people to prosper in the land. That if people intermarry with others who do not share the faith, that there will be conflicts and that the people and the land will not prosper in the same way. In chapter 24, verses 20 through 27, the children of Israel covenant to love and serve God, and Joshua tells them that ye are witnesses against yourselves. This goes to the nature of covenants, that we make them in the presence of our peers who can help hold us accountable, as well as to ourselves, that ultimately all ordinances and covenants and other incentives are just ways to reinforce and teach the nature of the covenant that one undertakes. And Joshua takes a stone and sets it up again as a tangible external witness and a reminder to all about the covenant made there, very similar to the rocks from the riverbed mentioned earlier. And in verse 33, I also find it interesting that the two deaths that are noted are the prophet and leader Joshua, as well as the son of Aaron, the high priest of the tabernacle, Eleazar. The scriptures keep track of these important lines that will eventually morph into the roles of king and priest, both of whom are placeholders and reminders of the King of Kings and the great high priest, who is Jesus Christ. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.